Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Adrian, this is All Booked Up, and today we are back with my weekly wrap-up. This is called My Week in Books. This is what I've been reading this week, how I've been enjoying it, what I've been getting up to. So, first up, we talked about this book in last week's wrap-up. I was about 75% of the way through it, and that is Unsold by Will White. So this is the first book in the Cradle series. It is a self-published fantasy series, sort of Eastern-inspired setting. It is, as I said last week, a Reddit darling. r/fantasy raves about this series. And I did love this book. I finished this book about a day after I filmed that last wrap-up last week. And I really did enjoy this book. I thought it was a really solid first entry into a series. For me, a lot of it did feel like setup. I think that it really felt like it was setting us up for a long series. Now, maybe that's me projecting onto it, knowing that this is now a 9-book series, I think, and it's still being written. So maybe that's me projecting, but it certainly felt like setup. It felt like a very interesting prologue and start to a world building process and introduction to a character and a set of characters. And it did it really well. I really enjoyed it. It was a really good quick read. It helped me get out of my slump, and it was just a very fun, quick read. I always felt like I wanted to know what was happening next. It wasn't too complex. There wasn't too many viewpoints going on, but it was really, really enjoyable. I can absolutely see me reading a couple of these books a month, like reading a couple of books from the Cradle series a month. It was good fun. I can definitely see it progressing a lot in the following books. I did enjoy this one, but I think there is a lot of places this could go, and I can absolutely see how this series could progress into something amazing. For me, this was a 4-star read, really enjoyed it, very, very good, but there's lots of room for this series to grow, in my opinion. The next book I finished this week was The Bitter Twins, which is book 2 in the Winnowing Flame trilogy by Jen Williams. Now, I had read about a third of this when I checked in with you guys last week. As I said, it was a good follow-up so far for The Ninth Reign, which is the first book in this series, which I loved. I absolutely adored The Ninth Reign. I do think that The Bitter Twins continued to be a really good, solid sequel. Now, for me, it wasn't quite on the same level as The Ninth Reign. Now, I did enjoy the character work still immensely. I think the world was still super interesting. I think that we explored other parts of the world that we hadn't explored in book 1, which is always fun, and sort of a classic thing to do in the second book of a 3-book series. I think the new characters that we met were great. It was a 4.5-star read for me, so I loved it. I really enjoyed it. This was a really, really good book. It didn't quite attain the heights of The Ninth Reign, though. And for me, that is down to one main thing, and that is that it felt a little bit of a side quest. So it had a little bit of middle book syndrome where we could see where we're going, we can see where the end goal of the series is going to be, but we're not there yet, and we can't rush towards it because we've got a whole 3rd book coming. So I did feel like in terms of the plot, it felt a little bit tangential, a little bit side questy. However, in terms of the character work, in terms of the way they've developed, in terms of where we're heading, I cannot fault it. The writing is brilliant, and I'm really enjoying that. If you saw my Ninth Reign review, I said that the world building is just, Jen Williams has just thrown everything in. Like, has it got this? Yes. Got this? Yes. Got this? Yes. It's just fantasy elements from everywhere, just mashed into a world, and I love that. I think it's brilliant. And actually we are slowly uncovering how these things link together, how things are related, and how this world really functions, and I think that's really interesting. I also said after The Ninth Reign that I didn't see where many of the sci-fi elements people were talking about for this series were. So this is clearly fantasy, and people say fantasy with sci-fi elements, and I've not seen that in The Ninth Reign. I did see that a bit more in The Bitter Twins. So there is definitely a few more sci-fi elements that get introduced. I think they're introduced well. I think they make sense. They don't feel like a weird addition into the world. So I think that's really well done. And I can see that becoming even more the case as we go. It's becoming a little bit more sci-fi, however, firmly still in the fantasy realm. And like I said, brilliant book, 4.5 stars, just didn't quite attain the heights of the Ninth Reign for me, but I can absolutely see the Poison Song, book 3 in this series, being something that I absolutely adore, and this series could easily, if it continues at this level, slot into one of my top fantasy series of all time slots. It could easily make the top 10, because book 1 was 5 stars, this was a solid 4.5 star read. I'm excited to see where we go. So there are the 2 books we had left over from last week that I had started but not yet finished. There is one book this week that I have read and completed. I completed it last night as of time of recording. And this is another self-published first book in the series. And this is by an author called Raymond St. Elmo, which is a brilliant name. I really enjoy that as a pen name. I assume it's a pen name, but maybe not. Maybe that's his actual name. But that's brilliant. This is the first book in the Quest of the Five Clans series, and it is called The Blood Tartan. Now, I find it slightly difficult to describe what this book is. Part of me really dislikes that if you go on Goodreads and read the synopsis, read the little blurb, it tells you a bunch of stuff that you don't even completely learn. I was going to say in this book, maybe you do learn all of it in this book, but some of it's in the last chapter. So Goodreads, sort it out. Why do we have blurbs for things that tell us stuff that the book doesn't tell us, or only tells us right at the end? I really dislike that. But anyway, this book is definitely more about the journey than the destination, to quote Sanderson. However, it is described by the author himself as literary fiction. He says he has a love of magical realism. I think this is definitely, as far as I can see, is in the magical realism camp. Now, I've not read much, if any, magical realism before, so I'm not actually 100% sure how to categorise that, but it feels very much like magical realism from what I understand. I really enjoyed it. It has a very interesting and I would say enjoyable prose style to it. Now, the voice of the author here is very unique. Ignore very unique, that's such a stupid phrase. The voice of the author here is unique. It is interesting. I've not read anything like it before. It is in first person, so how much of that is from our protagonist's sort of voice and how much of it is the authorial's voice and writing style, I don't know, but I really enjoyed it. For some, it may be verging on purple in terms of prose. It might be overkill for some people. For me, it didn't feel overly flowery, but it did feel interesting. There were little references and motifs slotted in there that I really enjoyed. It didn't phrase things in a standard boring style. It had a bit more je ne sais quoi to it, shall we say. There is definitely a little bit more interest in the prose, and in lots of ways the prose is actually what made me continue in this book so quickly. It is only about 300 pages. I read it in about 3-4 days, which is pretty good going speed-wise for me. I don't blast through books in physical or Kindle form as quickly as I do, say, on audiobook. So for me, that's a pretty quick read. Just to give you a little brief synopsis, a bit less than Goodreads gives you though. We are following Rain Grey, who is also known as the Seraph. He is a spadassin, so that's a sort of assassin swordsman, a duelist, that's what he is. He is kind of a mercenary, but he is a mercenary who is trying to work for good in his city. And straight from the off, he is on a job and gets pulled into the workings of an underground society. He uncovers people that he has never encountered before. Very, very strange things happen. And as you can tell from the title of the series, The Quest of the Five Clans, that he meets one or a few of these clan members who are very strange, and very much that's where our magical realism comes in. This is not your typical fantasy. It is really good with its character work. I love Rain Grey. I am very interested to continue reading the series, but the real strength of it for me is Raymond St. Elmo's prose. I think it is very interesting. It certainly won't be for everybody, But for me, it was enjoyable. It made me want to keep going. We had nice short chapters. It was quite action-packed for something with such an interesting prose style. Often, if we've got that more literary feel, I found that books can be quite slow and plodding, and ponderous almost. Now, this was not. The Blood Tartan had action. Things were happening all the time to our protagonist, and it was very interesting. There were mysteries to uncover, but the prose was very, very interesting. I will aim to have a full review on the channel either this week or next week, but you should definitely have a look into this if you want to get into some self-pubbed, I was going to say fantasy, but magical realism more so, especially if you've got a more literary preference for your prose. I think the prose is very good, and it was a very, very enjoyable read. I can see myself continuing on in this series, definitely, and I gave it a solid 4 stars for this one. So, considering I finished Bitter Twins on audiobook last night, and I finished The Blood Tartan on Kindle last night, I currently am not reading any books. So, as of now, I am having to make a decision about what I'm going to be reading in this next week. On my weekly check-in next week, I would imagine you'll either hear me talking about Cradle Book 2, which I think is called Soulsmith, or you'll hear me talking about Quest of the Five Clans Book 2, which I believe is called The Moon Tartan. So I imagine you'll get a little bit more self-published fantasy, magical realism input from that. Hopefully I will have started on those and I'll be enjoying it and I'll be blasting through it. On audio, I have a choice to make. So I am quite tempted to jump straight into The Poison Song, which is book 3 of the Winnowing Flame trilogy by Joe Williams, although I feel like I might need a little break from that. So I could be continuing my Dresden re-listen, or even I might jump into book 2 of the Warlock Holmes series by J.S. Denning. I read A Study in Brimstone, which is the first one, or listened to that a few months ago, really enjoyed it. The next one is called The Hellhound of the Baskervilles, so you can probably see where that's going. So we'll see what I choose to get into today, but yes, hopefully you found that interesting. Keep an eye out for the Blood Tartan review coming later in the week, hopefully, and I will see you guys soon. Don't forget to like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you are interested in more content from me, and yes, like I said, I'll see you soon.